Imagine being wrongfully accused of a crime just because of the color of your skin. This is exactly what happened to one unsuspecting man who was about to face the consequences of a racist cop's mistake. The officer, eager to make an arrest, wrongly identified him as a criminal. What seemed like a routine arrest quickly turned into an unexpected twist when the man was brought into court. The cop, confident he had the right person, soon learned just how wrong he was. As the judge and the courtroom stared in shock, the man revealed his true identity: a federal prosecutor. How did this happen? How did the cop miss such a critical detail? Stay tuned to find out how this unbelievable story unfolds as the tables are turned and the cop is forced to confront his own mistakes. You won't believe the shocking aftermath of this misidentification. It all started one rainy evening when Officer Daniels was called to investigate a robbery at a local store. The description of the suspect was vague at best, but Daniels, driven by his own biases, was quick to judge. He saw a man, dressed in a hoodie, walking down the street, and without a second thought he made the arrest. Little did he know, this wasn't just any man. The person he had grabbed off the street was James Carter, a respected federal prosecutor known for his tough stance on criminal justice. At first, Daniels didn't think much of it. He had seen countless suspects over the years. But as they arrived at the police station, something didn't sit right. The more Daniels looked at James, the more he realized something wasn't adding up. Still, he pushed forward, convinced the man in handcuffs was just another case to close. But the truth was about to come crashing down in a way Daniels never expected. As Daniels sat in the interrogation room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He went through the motions, asking James the standard questions, but the man remained calm, his responses clear and composed. Too composed. Daniels was used to suspects either panicking or getting defensive, but James didn't flinch once. His calmness only made Daniels more suspicious, and the officer's frustration grew with every passing minute. He wanted this to be a quick case, something easy to chalk up. But the more he looked at James, the more a strange sense of doubt crept in. The quiet confidence in James's voice sounded oddly familiar. Daniels, however, was too proud to admit that he might have made a mistake. Meanwhile, James wasn't worried. He had already tried to explain who he was, but the officer hadn't been listening. James knew this wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a matter of principle. The deeper this went, the more his own sense of justice burned inside him. If Daniels didn't listen, James would have to find a way to show him, without revealing everything all at once. The situation had the potential to ruin more than just the officer's reputation. It could spark a wider conversation about how police approach people of color and the biases they carry. James wasn't about to let this moment slip by. But how far could he push before it all exploded? Would anyone believe him? The clock was ticking, and both men felt the weight of what was unfolding, unaware of how much bigger this would get. The tension in the room thickened as Officer Daniels paced back and forth, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. How had he made such a monumental error? The more he questioned James, the more the prosecutor's calm, steady demeanor unsettled him. There was something about James's silence, his poised answers, that felt almost calculated. But Daniels couldn't back down now. His pride was on the line. He'd made the arrest, and now he was going to see it through no matter what. James, on the other hand, could feel the room closing in on him. His mind raced too, but it was with a different kind of urgency. He knew he couldn't let the situation escalate any further, but he had no choice but to play along for now. The more Daniels pressed him, the more James could see the officer's frustration building. What started as a simple misunderstanding had turned into a standoff of egos. James had to find a way to bring the truth to light without giving away too much. If he revealed his identity too soon, it could make things worse for both of them. Suddenly, the door to the interrogation room swung open, and the lead detective entered, his face grim. "Daniels," he said, his voice low but firm, "you've got a big problem on your hands." Daniels froze, his heart sinking. His mind immediately went to all the possible scenarios. Had someone filed a complaint? Was there evidence proving James' innocence? The detective pulled a file from under his arm, slamming it onto the table with a heavy thud. It was the arrest report. Daniels looked at the detective in confusion as he flipped it open. "You didn't even check his credentials, did you?" Daniels blinked, feeling a cold sweat forming on his forehead. "What do you mean?" The detective didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a business card in front of Daniels. James's business card. "You might want to take a look at that," the detective said quietly, his voice filled with the weight of an undeniable truth. Daniels' stomach dropped. He looked at the card, then back at James, who was now leaning back in his chair with a quiet, knowing smile. It hit Daniels like a ton of bricks. He was no longer just facing a mistake. He was staring down the consequences of his own prejudice. The room seemed to close in as the realization washed over him. But it wasn't over yet. The truth had just begun to unfold, and the storm was far from finished. The detective's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and for a moment, Daniels stood frozen. His mind was racing, trying to piece together how he had missed something so glaringly obvious. But as he stared at the business card, the pressure in the room seemed to intensify. James hadn't broken a sweat, but Daniels felt the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had made a critical mistake, and now his career, maybe even his freedom, was on the line. Just as Daniels was about to speak, a sudden knock at the door interrupted the silence. A uniformed officer entered, her expression tense, holding a sealed envelope. "Sir, this just came through," she said, handing it to Daniels with a nervous glance at James. The officer opened the envelope without thinking twice, expecting to find something routine, maybe a procedural update. But what he pulled out was nothing like he expected. His eyes scanned the document, and his face drained of color. "What is it?" the detective asked, sensing something even darker was unfolding. Daniels didn't answer right away. He was too busy processing the letter in front of him. It was an urgent memo from the Internal Affairs Department detailing a deep corruption investigation. The shocking part: it named Officer Daniels as a person of interest. The document detailed how the officer's involvement in an earlier case had raised suspicion, and now, with his questionable... Daniels looked at him sharply, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" Before James could respond, a new voice interrupted. The door opened again, and in walked an unexpected figure, Detective Emily Walker, a name that was already known in local law enforcement circles for her involvement in high-profile investigations. She had been in the background, unnoticed until now. But when she spoke, her voice was calm but commanding. "I think it's time we all knew the truth." The shock in Daniel's eyes was immediate. Emily wasn't just another officer. She was a key player in the corruption case Daniels had never imagined would touch him. As the detective stepped forward, she revealed the final twist. The entire operation had been a setup, one that involved not just Officer Daniels, but several others higher up in the force, all tied to illegal activities James had been quietly investigating for months. James's calm demeanor now made sense. He wasn't just a prosecutor. He had been undercover, working for months to expose the web of corruption within the department. The robbery case had been a distraction, a way to put Daniels in a position where he would make the crucial mistake that would unravel everything. And James, he had played his part, knowing that when the time came, Daniels would be the perfect pawn to bring it all to light. The room went cold as the realization hit Daniels. The power had shifted in a way he never saw coming. "You've been using me," Daniels whispered, the weight of betrayal crashing down on him. James nodded, but there was no glee in his expression. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said softly. "But this goes beyond you and me. It's about accountability. It's about justice." As Emily and James exchanged a quiet glance, the door swung open one last time, this time with a flood of officers from Internal Affairs. Daniels knew it was over. But as they moved to arrest him, something else gnawed at him. How much of this had been orchestrated, and who else was involved? Just as the cuffs were being placed around his wrists, Daniels caught a glimpse of the detective's face. Emily's expression was unreadable, yet there was a slight flicker of something. Was it sympathy? Or was she just as trapped in the game as everyone else? As Daniels was led away, the question hung in the air: who could really be trusted when everything was built on lies? The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. And just like that, the tension that had filled the room for so long finally broke. The truth had come to light, but the final twist wasn't what anyone expected. There were still pieces of the puzzle left to uncover, and the deeper you dug, the darker the story seemed to get. As the dust settled, Officer Daniels was escorted out of the station, his once confident stride replaced by the heavy shuffle of someone facing the consequences of their own actions. The weight of everything he had done and failed to see was now clear. James O.